Alright, so another video. This time we're doing 27.3. This goes with the textbook pages that I posted as well. American life in the 50s. And the question is, was it America's golden decade? You watched a movie about Elvis and his impact in the background of teenage madness in the 1950s, and you know that there were some cracks in the veneer of what looked to be a perfect society. So what I want to do right now is show you all the wonderful ways that America was an example to the rest of the world as a symbol of what it was like to have a perfect life. And of course, there is no such thing as a perfect life, but we got pretty close in the 1950s. And when you look at Donald Trump and what he's yearning for, make America great again, he's thinking of the 1950s. That was the time that America could do no wrong. So the American dream, it's kind of an idea that you may have heard of. It's this idea that anyone can make it in the United States because it's a land of opportunity. It means more than that, but that's a basic definition. In the 1950s, a majority of Americans were more prosperous than ever before. In fact, the United States was the most prosperous place in the world. An example, a lot of people in America were able to buy a house, a car, many modern conveniences like a refrigerator, washing machine, and a television. As you know from the movie, that between 1950 and 1959, we went from 2% owning televisions to basically 9 out of 10 people, 90% people owning televisions in America. And the television was the center of the house by 1960 in almost every home. Another thing that helped the prosperity of the United States was the GI Bill. That returning soldiers got little help from the government, a little reward for their service in the war. Free college education. Many GIs, many general infantrymen, went to college on the GI Bill. The GI Bill actually still exists, and many military personnel, after they get out of the service, they make use of that free education. The government also give you financial help with purchasing a house, give you a decent mortgage, interest rate, that kind of thing. So the GI Bill was actually made sure that a bunch of people who had already seen the world, had some experience of the world, and they weren't teenagers anymore, got an education. Americans became the most educated people in the world, other than maybe the Soviet Union, by 1960 or so. Here's a family sitting around watching TV. The TVs had little screens. This is actually a large TV for the 1950s. Actually, I think this may even be a picture from the 1960s, early 1960s. But the original TVs are pretty small, as you can see, and they have those rounded edges. You may have even witnessed one of these in your distant childhood. I don't know. Another thing that changed during the 1950s and actually added to that prosperity was a lot of couples started families after the war. I guess they missed each other. This increase in births became known as the baby boom, and children became known as baby boomers. And there's a phrase called "okay boomer" when older people, like not as young as me, but older, a little older than me, and they can't do technology and stuff, you go, oh, okay, boomer. That refers to those guys, these baby boomers. More family members in society meant more people who needed things. They need to buy things. The family needs to buy stuff for them, and that promotes the economy, because if people are buying stuff, people need to make more stuff, which means more factories are opening, which means more people are employed, and so on and so forth. And we've got clothes, we've got toys, we've got food, we've got all kinds of things. That helps the economy. Here are some examples of a couple of things I looked up online. Toys, of course, and you need to buy your Lone Ranger mask and your cowboy outfit for fans of the TV show. That is such a creepy photo. Look at the clown. Ooh, ooh. So, yeah, so it had its good and its bad. Consumer culture and consumerism. So the consumer is the person who buys stuff. So if you have a consumer culture, you've got a culture where people are encouraged to buy stuff, and you have this situation where the whole culture is kind of into this idea of buying stuff. That's consumerism. Advertising, of course, helped enormously in promoting this need that people thought they had for new things. Advertisers, last paragraph here, advertisers would promise that if you bought the new products, your life would improve in all kinds of ways. They were selling not only the product, but the dream of a better life, an even better American dream. So that's a consumer culture. I would say that we're the inheritors of this consumer culture. Maybe not right now during the coronavirus epidemic, but think of those times when you went shopping for fun. That's consumerism. And look at all the wonderful things you could buy. Rock and roll. Rock and roll had a huge influence on not only America and American culture, but on the world. Rock and roll was a kind of, I'm simplifying incredibly now, but rock and roll was a kind of intensely rhythmic blues music. It had a backbeat to it, so it's like that. If you have a 4/4 beat, 1, 2, 3, 4, like that on the offbeat, that's the heart of rock and roll. Became very popular among white teenagers who were listening to people like Chuck Berry. There's Chuck Berry. And Elvis, of course, as you know, was an exponent of this new style known as rock and roll. It was incredibly direct. It was incredibly easy to play, incredibly difficult to do really well, and a lot of Americans did it really well. And you also had people overseas, especially in my country, bands like the Beatles, Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin. They would not be even in bands if it wasn't for American rock and roll. These people, Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis, Buddy Holly, Chuck Berry, Fats Domino, all those guys. Little Richard, by the way, just died. Chuck Berry argued that he invented rock and roll, so did Fats Domino, so did Bo Diddley, bunch of black performers. Yeah, well, I guess we'll never know. Although, in the movie Back to the Future, the first one, Chuck Berry is actually credited with the invention of rock and roll. Another change that happened during the 1950s that perhaps contributed to this golden age was moving out of the smelly city, and into something called the suburbs, which was not quite the country. It wasn't like living on a farm, but it was green and it was quiet and it was beautiful and it didn't have the hustle and bustle of the city. So a suburb is a residential area that surrounds a city. Levittown, New York was one of the first manufactured suburbs after the war. Levittown, Long Island was built by the company Levitt & Sons, and they actually used factory techniques to build houses really quickly, really cheaply, really efficiently. Factory techniques that had been used on the assembly line of Ford Motor Company, but also increasingly in American retail like McDonald's. McDonald's was designed around an assembly line, a factory assembly line. So was Levittown, Long Island, and McDonald's is a product of the 1940s and 50s, and Levittown was a housing version of this assembly line structure of a modern company. The bottom photo is a picture of the first Levittown in Long Island. It's still there. These houses are still lived in, and see how they kind of all look the same. This is a book. My wife has a book selling business, and she sold this book, and I said, let me take a picture of one of the pages in there. They'll be perfect. But this is the kind of idea of a perfect suburban street. And this story was about a perfect suburban family with these twins called the Happy Twins or something, I think was the name of the book. The suburbs, they turned out not to be as wonderful as everyone thought they were, but still. So, to sum up, the golden decade, was it a golden decade? Well, you have a 40-minute video that you watched, which talks about some of the stuff that maybe wasn't so golden, or maybe it was, I don't know, you make up your own mind when you answer the question, the Google question, which I'm going to post. But if you look at, I'm arguing right now that it was a golden decade. Most people in the United States, that's if you're white, they were doing better than they ever had before in the 1950s, and also a lot of African Americans were doing better than they had been before the war. But there were some looming problems, such as the prevalence continuation of segregation, which we're going to get to at a later date. You could raise children, own a house, a car, go on vacation. You could still save money for the future all on one income, and you guys know that it takes usually two incomes to make ends meet these days. Imagine if only one parent had to go to work, and the other in the 1950s would be the wife who would stay home and be a housewife. And it drove some people potty, having to live that life. It was a kind of a dead-end life. Dad goes to work, comes home, Mum cleans the house, makes food, cleans, that kind of thing. It turned into a little bit of a nightmare in some ways, because it was so unutterably boring. But it was very, very safe. I think the movie mentioned how people returning from the war, all they wanted was stability and sameness. They didn't want to go out on a limb. They just wanted a good job and a nice house. But here's the other point, is that this American prosperity, the world looked at America with wonder at how amazingly America was doing, and they wanted a piece of that.